All right, so here's what I've been wondering is, does GMO yeast actually give you wings? When I first started hearing about GMO or bioengineered yeast, it was all about thiolizing English strains to unlock bound thiols and boost tropical flavors and aromas like passion fruit and guava. But we've come a long way since then. These days, yeast labs are modifying popular strains with all kinds of goals in mind, like producing lactic acid, eliminating diacetyl, and more. And when I say popular strains, I mean stuff like this, a modified version of Hornindal Kvike. So here's the question, does GMO yeast guarantee you a better beer? Today, I'm making a pale ale with this very special yeast strain, and I'm hoping to get just a little bit closer to answering that question. Now, let's make some beer. For this beer, I'm starting with a blank slate of reverse osmosis water, and I'm doctoring it up to give it the right mouthfeel and perception of the hops. I want a crisp and juicy beer, and this water should help get me there. The malt bill is super simple. Just 60% pale malt and 40% white wheat malt, aiming for an original gravity of around 1060. Now that everything is well saturated and recirculating, I'm adding 56 grams of Cascade hops to the mash. These mash hops should provide the precursors that fuel this very special yeast and the tropical fruit flavors it's capable of producing. This is Hornindal Tropics from Berkeley Yeast, a startup yeast designer from San Francisco, California, and here's how they say it works. The enzyme under the hood is a carbon sulfur lyase, or CSL, which converts flavorless precursor molecules in malt and hops into flavorful free thiols. Once liberated, these thiols smell and taste like guava and passion fruit and have notes that are reminiscent of popular new school hops. Okay, so if I'm gonna get more flavor out of my hops, theoretically, that means I can get away with using less hops than usual. And I've actually read a few things online that show some concern about engineered yeast negatively impacting the hop market. But if you're anything like me, I doubt you're thinking about how you can use less hops. If anything, a yeast like this only makes me want to use more. After a 60-minute mash at 149 degrees Fahrenheit or 65 Celsius, it's time to yank these grains and get our boil started. We've been boiling for 15 minutes now, and it's time for the first hop addition. Here's 28 grams or around 20 IBUs of Nectaron, and our short 30-minute boil is halfway done. Just like that, the 30-minute boil is complete and it's time for the whirlpool. I'm dropping the temperature down, adding another 28 grams of Nectaron, and I'll let this spin for 20 minutes. After the whirlpool, I chilled the wort as quickly as possible and let it stabilize in the tank at 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 Celsius. Then I pitched this magical dose of yeast that was grown for this specific batch of beer and sent to me by Berkeley Yeast. Fermentation went about as expected, and a couple days before packaging, I added a big pile of Nectaron. Now, here comes one of the best steps of the brewing process, the tasting. But before we see how the beer turned out, this video was supported in part by Into the AM, the crew behind this rad t-shirt. Now, some of you might know that I'm a designer by day, and maybe that's why I like these shirts so much. They have some of the coolest looking graphics around, and they print them on super soft, high quality t-shirts. More recently, they've been adding some new designs with a smaller graphic on the front and a larger graphic on the back, which I think is kind of a cooler look. No pressure to buy anything, but I highly recommend hitting the link down below and checking out their designs. Now, let's see how this beer turned out. This beer clocks in at 5.8% ABV, 36 estimated IBUs, and it definitely looks the part. Truthfully, I was aiming for a Pacific Pale Ale, and I've never actually had one, so it might be hard for me to know if I got it just right, but this aroma is massive. Mountains of that pineapple, guava, and passion fruit I was expecting, and there's a bit of malty wheat hiding in the background. The flavor follows suit with a big tropical fruit flavor. It is absolutely delicious. But that said, I kind of regret using so much wheat malt. It's appropriate for a Pacific Pale Ale, but there's a note in here that I don't love, and I'm guessing the wheat is the culprit. Nonetheless, this yeast certainly performed as advertised, and I'm looking forward to more experimentation. Another thing I noticed is the datasheet specifically recommends not mash hopping with this yeast because it's prone to creating astringent, bitter, and vegetal off flavors. I'm not getting those flavors here, but next time I'll be sure to take that advice. So that's Hornindal Tropics. Big thanks to Berkeley Yeast for sending it out, but guys, that's not all they sent. We got the hoppy part taken care of, but I was also curious to try something a little gnarly, so I asked them to send me this one, Chico Galactic. As the name implies, they started with a classic Chico strain and they gave it a superpower. Lactic acid production has been dialed in, so the finishing pH is around 3.5, and fruit additions will further increase acidity. To put this one to the test, I set out to make a Berliner Weiss. Half wheat, half Pelton Pills, very little hops, and here we are ready to pitch the yeast. And in my opinion, a co-pitch with Brettanomyces is the only way to go for a Berliner Weiss, so it'll be a while before I taste the final product. So far, I'm really loving what companies like Berkeley Yeast are doing to push boundaries for the beer industry. Now, I think it's normal for new developments like GMO or bioengineered yeast to be met with some skepticism and uncertainty, but from what I can see, this progressive new capability only adds to what's possible for both brewers and consumers. Now, if you live outside the United States or you just haven't gotten around to trying some of these new yeasts, you might be wondering, how big of a difference do these types of yeast actually make? And if I'm honest, I'd say it kinda depends. Just like all yeast strains, you have to create the optimal conditions to get the optimal results. And plenty of brewers are still winning medals and making outstanding beer with traditional yeast. If you use the right hop schedule and yeast strain, you can definitely create very similar flavors with non-GMO strains. But again, from what I can see, this new capability only adds to what's possible for both brewers and consumers. If you want to learn more about Berkeley Yeast, check out the link below. And before you ask, unfortunately, Berkeley Yeast is not currently selling homebrew sized pitches, but who knows if that will change in the future. My name's Dan, this is Hops and Gnarly. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll see you again soon.